The Velair's message blared across every communication channel on Earth. Their voice was sharp, metallic, devoid of emotion, as they demanded humanity's immediate surrender. They described themselves as the Velair Dominion, an interstellar empire that had conquered worlds beyond imagination. The message was simple: submit, or be annihilated. It wasn't the first time the Velair had issued such an ultimatum, but for Earth, it was the first, and possibly the last. On the other side of that broadcast, Commander Rain sat in silence, eyes fixed on the screen in front of him. His office, usually buzzing with the hum of reports and updates, was eerily quiet. His gaze hardened as he watched the Velair fleet hover ominously over the planet, casting dark shadows across the cities below. There was a tension in the air, a feeling of impending doom. But Rain wasn't one to give in to fear. "We're not going to bow down," he muttered to himself, before standing up and turning to his team. Each of them had the same haunted look in their eyes, a mixture of fear, anticipation, and resolve. They knew what was coming. "The Velair have underestimated us," Rain said, his voice low but commanding. "They always do." The Velair's assessment of humanity had been wrong from the start. They saw Earth as primitive, divided, and technologically inferior. In their arrogance, they assumed that their superior weapons, their towering ships, and their cold precision would crush any resistance in days, if not hours. But humanity had always thrived in the face of overwhelming odds. Around the world, the response was immediate. The fragmented governments of Earth, always at odds with one another, suddenly found a common cause. Military forces, hackers, engineers, and scientists alike began working in unison. Everyone knew what was at stake. This wasn't just another war. This was extinction or survival. Behind closed doors, Rain and his advisors pored over the data they had on the Velair. It wasn't much, but it was enough to find a glimmer of hope. The Velair relied heavily on their advanced technology, particularly their AI systems, to coordinate their vast fleet. But those systems had one critical flaw: if you could penetrate them, you could cripple their entire operation. "We need to hit them where it hurts," Rain said, leaning over the holographic display of the Velair fleet. "Their command structure is centralized. If we disrupt their communication, they won't know how to coordinate." The room was thick with tension as the team began to lay out their plan. It was reckless, maybe even suicidal, but they had no other choice. Earth couldn't outmatch the Velair in a head-on fight. They needed to be smarter, faster, more adaptable. And they would be. Across the world, preparations began. Soldiers readied their weapons, engineers worked around the clock to enhance Earth's defenses, and underground networks of hackers prepared to launch a digital assault on the Velair systems. The plan wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. Humanity's strength had always been its ability to adapt, to think creatively under pressure. They would turn their weaknesses into advantages. The Velair, still hovering in their sleek, imposing ships, watched from above. They were patient, as if toying with Earth before delivering the final blow. Their confidence was palpable. They had crushed so many worlds before this one. What was another insignificant planet to them? But even as they prepared their forces for the invasion, they didn't understand what they were truly up against. Back on Earth, Rain stood before a monitor, watching the Velair fleet inch closer. His team was ready. Every nation on the planet had rallied their resources for this one, desperate defense. He knew the Velair thought of humanity as weak, fractured, easy to dominate. But they didn't know what humans were capable of when pushed to the brink. "They think they know us," Rain said to his team. "But they don't know what's coming." And with that, the final preparations were complete. The Velair had begged for war, and humanity was about to deliver it in full force. They wouldn't surrender. They wouldn't break. Not now. Not ever. The Velair's ships descended with the precision of a predator stalking its prey, their formation flawless, as if they believed victory was already in hand. They hadn't sent their full armada, just a vanguard, enough to show their power, not so much that they felt the need to worry about a potential resistance. They didn't believe humanity posed a real threat. But humanity wasn't going to just sit back and take it. The first wave of Velair attack drones came hurtling through Earth's upper atmosphere, targeting key military installations, communications hubs, and energy grids. Their strategy was as calculated as it was ruthless: sever Earth's ability to organize, disrupt any coordinated defense. It was a tactic that had worked before, on countless other worlds. They hadn't counted on Earth being different. Commander Rain had anticipated their move. "Let them hit what they want," he had said during the last strategy meeting. "Our real strength isn't in what they can see. It's in what they can't." As the Vele drones initiated their first strikes, Earth's defenses appeared to crumble. Communication blackouts, power surges, military facilities erupting in explosions. The Velair commanders observed from orbit, satisfied that the initial phase of the invasion was proceeding as planned. What they didn't see, however, was the web of human countermeasures already in place, triggered the moment the first drone hit. Underground data networks rerouted communications, bypassing the systems the Velair believed they had destroyed. Power grids switched to emergency reserves, military forces scattered into predetermined fallback positions. The Velair saw chaos, but it was a carefully orchestrated illusion. Rain's team was in full control. They had expected this initial wave and had set the stage to make it seem like Earth was on its last legs. They had studied Velair tactics, learned how they relied on predictable strikes, overwhelming their opponents with fast, precise blows. But humanity had always thrived in chaos, using the unexpected to their advantage. While the Velair focused their attention on conventional targets, Rain launched the next phase of his plan, targeting the very thing the Velair had overlooked: their reliance on AI-driven coordination. Human cyber teams had been preparing for weeks, working with a level of speed and improvisation that the Velair AI couldn't anticipate. Earth's greatest strength was that it could adapt in ways the Velair hadn't programmed for. He counterattack began with a series of digital incursions. Using experimental code developed by some of Earth's best hackers, they infiltrated the Velair's command algorithms, sending faulty data into their targeting systems. The Velair drones, suddenly receiving conflicting instructions, began to falter. Some turned back towards space, others fired randomly into empty fields, their systems overloaded with misinformation. "That's just the beginning," Rain said, watching as the Velair ships attempted to compensate for the disruption. "We've only scratched the surface." The human team escalated the attack, targeting not just the Velair's drones but their fleet's communication relays. Velair's ships started to lose synchronization, their movements no longer fluid and coordinated. One by one, the Velair commanders began to realize something was wrong, but by then, it was too late. On the ground, human forces took advantage of the confusion. Rain had deployed strike teams in key locations, hidden from Velair scans by technological tricks and old-fashioned camouflage. These forces moved swiftly, engaging Velair ground units that had been deployed to secure Earth's cities. The Velair, unused to prolonged ground warfare, were unprepared for the kind of resistance they faced. Human soldiers used guerrilla tactics, setting traps, striking quickly, and vanishing into the ruins of their cities before the Velair could respond. What the Velair had mistaken for a species about to break was actually one rising to the challenge. Rain knew that Velair doctrine was rigid, built around the belief that superior technology and overwhelming force would always win the day. What they had never faced was an enemy that could adapt faster than they could calculate, one that was willing to fight with everything at their disposal: human ingenuity, desperation, and an understanding of their home terrain. In the Velair command center, confusion was spreading. Reports of disrupted communications, failed drone strikes, and human counterattacks began to pour in. The Velair commanders, so sure of their superiority, found themselves facing a new reality, one in which they were no longer in control. Some of them began to question their tactics, wondering if they had underestimated the humans. As the battle raged, Rain knew the tide was turning. The Velair had come expecting an easy conquest, but what they had found was a species that refused to be crushed. Earth's forces weren't stronger, weren't more advanced, but they were far more resilient. And in this fight, resilience was the key. The Velair's arrogance had been their downfall. By assuming they could predict humanity's every move, they had blinded themselves to the possibility that humans could do the unexpected. Rain had turned their strength into their weakness, exploiting the Velaya's reliance on cold, calculated tactics, and throwing them into disarray. "We're not done yet," Rain said, watching as the Velaya fleet began to regroup. "This is just the beginning." The Velaya command was reeling from the unexpected resistance. What had begun as a confident invasion was now a chaotic mess. Their technology, once seen as invincible, was being outmaneuvered by human cunning. On board the Velaya flagship, frustration simmered as commanders argued about the next move. Their fleet, once operating with flawless precision, now struggled to adapt to a species they had grossly underestimated. The Velaya weren't used to dealing with unpredictability. But humans had always thrived on it. Back on Earth, Commander Rain was already planning the next steps. Every victory had cost humanity, but each loss had been calculated. The sacrifices made in the early stages of the war were starting to pay off. Morale among the human forces was growing, despite the overwhelming odds. They knew now that the Velaya could bleed. They could be beaten. "Next phase," Rain muttered to his team. He wasn't one for speeches, but his confidence was infectious. It kept everyone focused. Humanity's next move was as bold as it was desperate, a direct assault on the Velaya's command ship. It was a plan that could end the war, one way or another. Rain's team had identified a weakness in the Velaya's defenses, a flaw buried deep within their technological arrogance. The Velaya had relied on their advanced systems for so long that they had forgotten the value of instinct, of human adaptability. Rain was determined to exploit that. The team that would carry out the mission wasn't the most experienced or the best equipped. They were simply the ones willing to do what needed to be done. They would launch a covert attack using stealth shuttles designed to evade the Velaya's detection systems. The goal was simple: take out the command structure, destabilize the Velaya leadership, and send their fleet into chaos. It was a risky plan, but at this stage, it was all humanity had. As the mission launched, the Velaya continued their attempts to regroup. Their commanders, still reeling from the initial setbacks, doubled down on their traditional tactics. They escalated their bombardment of Earth, launching massive strikes intended to crush any lingering resistance. Cities burned, and the death toll mounted. But every strike was met with retaliation. Human forces had become experts at guerrilla warfare, striking and retreating, drawing the Velaya into traps they never saw coming. The Velaya couldn't understand it. Every time they thought they had gained the upper hand, the humans found another way to strike back. Rain's tactics were unconventional, unpredictable, and unlike anything the Velaya had encountered in their previous conquests. They had assumed humans would be overwhelmed by their superior firepower and technology. But instead, the humans seemed to grow stronger with every defeat. Deep within the Velaya fleet, whispers of fear began to spread. Some of their soldiers, usually conditioned to follow orders without question, started to doubt their invincibility. They had never faced a species that fought like this, one that adapted so quickly, learned so rapidly, and refused to give in. The Velaya had always won their wars through brute force and calculated strikes. But brute force wasn't enough anymore. They were dealing with an enemy that refused to be predictable. Meanwhile, Rain's strike team moved closer to the Velaya command ship. The tension was palpable. Every second counted, every movement had to be perfect. There would be no second chances. As they approached the Velaya's flagship, they could see the massive vessel in all its terrifying glory. It loomed above them, a symbol of the Velaya's supposed superiority. But Rain knew that symbols meant nothing in a fight like this. Only results mattered. Back on Earth, the battle raged on. The Velaya continued their relentless assault, but their coordination was faltering. Rain's earlier strikes had done more damage than they realized. Human forces took advantage of every opening, launching counterattacks that further destabilized the Velaya's operations. The once mighty Velaya armada was starting to splinter. Their command structure was fraying, and without clear leadership, their forces were becoming disorganized. Inside the Velaya command ship, panic was starting to set in. Reports of human strikes were flooding in, and the commanders struggled to keep control. Their once unshakable confidence was eroding, replaced by the grim realize. And then, the strike team hit. The explosion rocked the Velair flagship, sending shockwaves through their fleet. Chaos erupted as systems failed, communication lines went dark, and their central command was thrown into disarray. The Velair were no longer the hunters, they were the hunted. Rain's gamble had paid off. The strike on the Velair command ship had crippled their leadership, throwing their entire invasion force into confusion. On Earth, human forces seized the opportunity. They pressed their advantage, launching coordinated strikes that targeted key Velair ships. One by one, the Velair fleet began to fall. The Velair commanders, now leaderless and scattered, made one final, desperate attempt to regroup. But it was too late. The momentum had shifted. Humanity had taken everything the Velair had thrown at them and refused to break. Now, it was the Velair who were breaking. As the Velair fleet began its retreat, Earth's forces let out a collective sigh of relief. The battle wasn't over, not yet. But for the first time, they could see the light at the end of the tunnel. The Velair had come to conquer, but they had found something they didn't expect. They had found a species that couldn't be conquered. Rain watched the retreating ships with a cold satisfaction. He knew the fight wasn't finished, but this was a turning point. The Velair had underestimated humanity. They had thought they were fighting a primitive species, one that would bow under the weight of their superior technology. But instead they had found an enemy that could outthink, outfight, and outlast them. They wanted war, Rain said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. Now they'll get it. The battle was far from over, but Rain knew that humanity had just shown the Velair something they would never forget. Humans weren't just survivors. They were fighters. And they weren't going anywhere. The Velair were unraveling. What had begun as a show of dominance was now spiraling into chaos. Their fleet, once a symbol of unstoppable power, was disorganized, their communication in disarray. The strike on their command ship had broken the backbone of their invasion. Now, they were scrambling to re-establish control, but the damage had been done. From Earth, Commander Rain observed the battlefield, his sharp eyes tracking the Velair's every movement. They were retreating in small groups, their once synchronized fleet now scattered and confused. This was the moment he had been waiting for. This was the moment to deliver the final blow. Human forces, sensing the shift, pushed forward. What had been a defensive war now turned into a full-scale offensive. Earth soldiers, engineers, and strategists had been waiting for this opportunity. They knew the Velair were vulnerable now, and they were determined to capitalize on it. Rain's command was simple: no mercy. The Velair, realizing the extent of the damage to their fleet, made a desperate attempt to regroup. Their commanders, now fragmented and panicked, issued conflicting orders, causing further confusion. Some Velair ships attempted to retreat entirely, while others stubbornly tried to hold their ground. The once unbreakable Velair fleet was now splintering into fragments. Human forces struck with precision. Coordinated attacks targeted key Velair vessels, focusing on the ships that were still trying to maintain some semblance of order. Rain had anticipated this, knowing that the Velair's pride would prevent them from an immediate full retreat. They couldn't bear the thought of abandoning their invasion so quickly. That hesitation was their downfall. On board the Velair ships, the once confident crew were now in disarray. They had never encountered an enemy that fought like this, that adapted so quickly, that turned their own strategies against them. For the first time in their history, they were losing, and they didn't know how to handle it. Their cold, calculated tactics had failed against an enemy they had dismissed as inferior. Fear crept into their ranks, and fear, more than anything, was what drove their defeat. As the human forces closed in, the Velair made one last desperate move. They activated their most powerful weapons, hoping to turn the tide back in their favor. Massive energy blasts were fired from their remaining ships, tearing through the skies and devastating parts of Earth's surface. But even this final, brutal assault wasn't enough. The humans had prepared for it, dispersing their forces to minimize casualties, using the Velair's own arrogance against them. Rain's team launched counterattacks with ruthless efficiency. Cyber warfare specialists targeted the Velair's energy systems, overloading them and causing catastrophic failures. On the ground, human strike teams moved with precision, taking out key Velair installations, It was a coordinated effort, a culmination of everything they had been working toward. Humanity, for all its flaws, had mastered the art of war in a way the Velair couldn't have predicted. In the midst of the battle, a realization began to dawn on the Velair. They had miscalculated, not just in their tactics, but in their understanding of what it meant to be human. They had expected Earth to fall quickly, to surrender under the weight of superior technology and overwhelming force. But humanity didn't surrender. They fought. And when backed into a corner, they fought with a ferocity that the Velair couldn't comprehend. The Velair's ships, now crippled and leaderless, began to break apart. Some exploded under the relentless human assault, while others were forced into retreat, their engines barely functional. The once mighty fleet that had descended on Earth with the promise of total domination was now nothing more than scattered wreckage. On the ground, the atmosphere shifted. The tension that had gripped the planet for weeks began to lift. Civilians, who had been living in fear of imminent destruction, started to emerge from shelters, their eyes turned toward the skies. They had endured so much, but now, for the first time, they could see hope. The Velair were retreating. Earth had survived. Rain stood at the command center, watching the Velair's ships disappear one by one. He didn't smile, didn't celebrate. The victory had come at a cost. Cities had been destroyed, lives lost, and the planet had been scarred by the Velair's assault. But they had won. Against all odds, they had won. The Velair had begged for war, and humanity had delivered, not just with weapons and strategy, but with an unyielding will to survive. The Velair's arrogance had blinded them to the true strength of their enemy. They had underestimated the power of human resilience, the capacity for ingenuity in the face of destruction, and the unwavering belief that no matter the odds, they would find a way to endure. As the last of the Velair's ships disappeared beyond Earth's atmosphere, Rain knew this wasn't the end. The Velair would regroup, rebuild, and perhaps, one day, return. But if they did, humanity would be ready. They had shown the Velair, and the universe, that they were not to be underestimated. Earth was not just a planet to be conquered, it was a force to be reckoned with. In the aftermath of the battle, as humanity began to pick up the pieces and rebuild, there was a shared understanding that the universe had changed. No longer were humans simply inhabitants of a distant planet on the edge of a vast galaxy. They had become something more, warriors, survivors, a species capable of standing toe-to-toe with an interstellar empire. Rain turned away from the screen, his mind already focused on the future. This was a victory, but it wasn't the end. The Velair would remember this day, and so would humanity. They had been underestimated, dismissed as weak and primitive. But now, they had proven their worth. The Velair had come expecting to crush humanity. Instead, they had found an enemy who fought back harder than they ever could have imagined. And in the end, it was the Velair who had been crushed, by a force they didn't understand, by a spirit they couldn't break. The message was clear: if the Velair, or any other species, ever came for Earth again, they would be met with the same unrelenting force. Humanity had shown that they were not just survivors, they were victors. And anyone who challenged them would do well to remember that.